The history of automobile manufacturing in Great Britain began later than in Germany. And this lag was due primarily to strict legislation that limited the speed of mechanically propelled vehicles. This legislation was adopted back in 1865 and required that in rural areas the speed should not exceed 4 miles per hour, and in the city no more than 2 miles per hour. All these stupid requirements were not so much the whims of the authorities themselves as of private road owners who lobbied these laws. And to better explain their role, it is important to note that in Britain, since the 18th century, there was a system of private roads. It consisted in the fact that entrepreneurs built these roads, maintained them in good condition, and for these services they had the right to collect fees from the owners of carriages who used them. And this whole system was enshrined at the legislative level. To understand the scale of this road system, the total length of the roads exceeded 30,000 miles, on which 8,000 toll collection points were located. And of course, such a scale led to the formation of a powerful group of businessmen, who were called Turnpike Trust. And when the railway appeared in Great Britain, it dealt a rather serious blow to this business, because it led to a decrease in transportation on these highways and, as a result, to a drop in the income of this business. Plus, the development of the railway also led to the appearance of new heavy mechanically propelled vehicles that ran on steam power and which can be called the first predecessors of tractors. And since these tractors also used roads, which is why they were called road locomotives, this caused dissatisfaction on the part of the highways. Therefore, in order to somehow stop this expansion, they lobbied for a series of so-called Locomotive Acts, which were supposed to suspend their use on their own roads. And all these restrictions were in effect until 1896 when they were repealed. In turn, the abolition of these norms led to the rapid growth of the automobile industry. And by 1913, the number of manufacturers had grown to almost 100 companies, which together produced 17,000 cars that year. Then this boom in automobile manufacturing was interrupted by the First World War, because most manufacturers, at the request of the government, transferred their production to military needs. However, on the other hand, military orders helped businesses accumulate significant financial reserves and gain new knowledge. And after the war, these factors became a new driver for the growth of the industry. By the early 1920s, the number of manufacturers had grown to almost 200 companies. At that time, well-known manufacturers such as Bentley and Rover appeared, and William Lyons, who would later found the Jaguar company, would also become interested in the production of motorcycles. And by the 1930s, Britain would become the largest car manufacturer in Europe. Then the Second World War began, and just like in the first, manufacturers would again focus on the production of military equipment. But although automobile companies thrived thanks to military orders during the Second World War, and even received new production facilities from the government, as it turned out, the industry was not ready for the new market realities. And the problem was the following. British companies, despite their success, remained small due to their focus on the production of premium cars. And while Britain held the lead in Europe until 1955, this allowed the British to compete on price. However, the growth of volumes in other countries led to the fact that foreign manufacturers, due to the effect of scale, began to reduce the prices of their own cars. And this, of course, also affected price competition in the industry. For the British themselves, such price competition turned into a disaster, because in order to somehow maintain their positions, British companies were forced to reduce prices. And the downside of such a step was losses, as well as reduced costs for production modernization and for the components themselves. This led to a decline in the quality of cars and a loss of market share. And such a vicious circle provoked a further intensification of the problems themselves. Therefore, in order to save the key industry for the economy, the government decided to act. In general, the solution to the problem suggested itself. Given that price competition in the industry was based on quite obvious advantages of the scale effect, the government decided to act in the same way. In general, there are many methods of achieving such an effect, but the fastest and easiest is to increase profitability by reducing labor costs. For example, if a company wants to reduce costs, it lays off a certain number of employees, and their functions are transferred to those who remain. However, such a method has a rather limited effect, because sooner or later a certain minimum number of employees must remain in the company, without whom the company will not be able to work. At the same time, if you look at the industry from above, you can see that absolutely all companies have certain identical divisions that perform absolutely identical tasks. That is, each company has some kind of administrative division consisting of lawyers, accountants, marketers. Therefore, in order to avoid duplication of these functions, these different companies need to be merged. Then the individual divisions will also merge, and this will allow to reduce a certain number of employees. In general, this logic of mergers works to this day and is often used in private business when individual companies merge or are acquired. And therefore, the government began to push companies to voluntary mergers, creating on their basis larger manufacturers. So in 1965, on the basis of such manufacturers as Morris and Austin, the holding company British Motors Corporation was created, and the following year Jaguar will join them, forming a new company, British Motors Holdings. A similar merger took place when the Leyland Company bought a number of smaller manufacturers, among which was the Rover Company. And even later, the government decided to further expand the business and organize the merger of two previously created holdings, British Motor and Leyland Motor. As a result, in 1968, a large corporation, British Leyland Motor Corporation, was created. However, all these mergers did not help to solve the problem, because instead of a large number of small, inefficient manufacturers, a large, inefficient monster appeared. And the main reason for this inefficiency was that each individual company protected its specialists and its ideas, and at the same time continued to consider colleagues as competitors. For example, the old competition between Austin and Morris after the merger turned into internal corporate competition. And this led to the fact that these manufacturers continued to produce competing models, did not want to share ideas and developments, and put spokes in the wheels of their competitors. Well, instead of a synergistic effect, the merger led to constant internal corporate wars and chaos in management, because of which the entire company and the industry as a whole suffered. Therefore, tired of this internal corporate war, the government decided in 1975 to nationalize this company. Now the government is often criticized for these steps, considering this situation a vivid example of the inefficiency of state management, although the problem itself had deeper roots. At the same time, despite this inefficiency of the merger, British manufacturers were able to continue their existence. And now, criticizing the government, many do not want to consider another scenario of events when most of the now well-known companies, such as Jaguar, for example, could cease their activities. Because the Jaguar company, at the time of nationalization, had long been a loss-making division of the group, and this company would not have survived on its own. Moreover, as I said earlier, the owner and employees of the company, even after the merger, continued to fight for their own ideas. And this, in turn, led to competition within the company between identical models. And given the weak sales, the company did not have its own funds to update production facilities. And this led to the fact that Jaguar cars were produced on outdated equipment from low-quality components, which severely damaged the company's reputation. The situation was so critical that the founder of the company, William Lyons, despairing of the company's prospects, stepped down from managing his brainchild even before nationalization, in 1972. And after the nationalization, the government even considered closing this unprofitable company. A very telling point here is that other manufacturers received state funding to upgrade production facilities, and Jaguar was considered only an unnecessary ballast. And this company would probably have disappeared into history if the company had not changed management in 1980. Then the company was headed by John Egan, who was given 6 months to make the company profitable, or it would be closed. And soon, the company became profitable again, which later allowed the government to put it up for privatization in 1984. Therefore, we can say for sure that despite such an unsuccessful example of state policy, the British managed to preserve their own automotive industry and then profitably sell it to foreign investors.